The only limit to creating beautiful scenes in Blender is your imagination. Well, your imagination and the VRAM on your video card. This isn't really too complicated of a scene. It doesn't have that many objects, yet still, I could not render it on my trusty 1080 with 8 gigs of VRAM. So, what was I to do? Well, what I did is I rendered each of the layers individually, and I used the compositor to stitch it all together. Jay with Cevohcam Studios, and today I'm going to show you how. So let's get started. We're going to start with a blank blend file and just go into the Compositing tab. I'm going to hit End, take away the menu, and I'm just going to remove the timeline because I don't really need it. Assembling this whole image with the compositor was really me just trying to save my work. Because I, of course, while I was playing around trying to set everything up to render as a separate scene, and then have my multiple scenes combined in the compositor, I accidentally deleted some stuff that I didn't need to delete. And I didn't have a backup of the stuff I deleted. But fortunately, that was on my last couple scenes that I was rendering, and I had enough images saved that I could actually go and create this image. So that's kind of what led me here. So in the Compositing tab, we're going to want to use the node setup, and it's going to pop up your first two nodes, the Composite node and the Render Layers node. Now, render layers will be good to use in the event that you are using multiple scenes and you're trying to combine them all in one. But since we're just going to be using images, I'm not going to use this. So I'm just going to delete it. Shift A to go and look for an input. And we're going to look for a image input. And we're going to plug that into the composite input. We're also going to go and add a layout, a reroute, to add this little node in between the nodes setup. And we're going to add a viewer output as well, just so we can see what we're working on. Now, it's going to be blank because we don't have anything loaded up. So let's start. And I am going to start, let's see here. I'm going to start with the background. That seems a good a place as any to start with. So locate where you have your images saved and load up your first image. Okay, the ring. There we go. You can now see in the background in the compositor that our image is now visible. You might want to zoom out a little bit. Alt V. Does that work? V. Okay, V works to zoom me out. Okay. Well, this is the start. I'm going to duplicate the rings, and I'm going to use that to load up the background image. Now you can see we've loaded it in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and add another node, and this is the alpha over node. And this is fundamentally what we're going to be using to stitch together all these images. So we're going to plug the image from the background node into the top here. We'll plug the Saturn ring into the bottom, and then plug this image into this other node that we left out here. Okay, so that's not bad, and it's starting to work. But I actually want the lighter side on the other side of this image. So you can actually go and do a lot of commands in here that you would have done with Photoshop. So for instance, you can use the flip command here to flip across an axis, and you can then start getting your different control over your image. Flip X and Y, flip X. Yeah, I think flip X should be fine. I'm going to now go in and add in the planet. So I'm going to duplicate the ring, replace it with the planet, and we're going to need another alpha over node, so I'm going to duplicate that, and we're just going to plug it in. Okay. So this obviously doesn't work. You can see that you got the planet covering the background and the foreground of the rings. So we're going to be able to get past this. Whoops, I'm just going to move this here by cropping the image. In cropping the image of the ring specifically. So I'm going to add the crop node for the rings, and I'm going to plug it in right here. Now, it deleted it, so we're going to want to go and turn on relative crop, and the values that I used was 1 on left, 0 on right, 1 on up, and 0.5 on down. So if you are looking at this, you might get a sense as to what this is doing. So by going from 1 to 0.5 here on the up and down, I'm telling Blender to start from the top of the image at 0.1 and go all the way down to 0.5. And then we're going to crop out everything else. You can now take this and duplicate this again, plug the image in. You're going to want to duplicate your alpha over node again. And when you plug that in, it still looks the same. Well, that's not what we want, because we want it going from 0 from the up to 0.5 on the down. Let's just see how this works there. 0.4, yeah, 0.5. And you can see we now have the planet put behind the ring where it's supposed to be. Perfect. And what you can also do here is you can add in little nodes to adjust the hue, saturation, or value of anything that you're working on. So for instance, I can plug the ring texture into here, and then plug the outputs into both of those. It'll maintain the cutting we've done, but now when you edit the hue on this side here, it'll go and edit it for the entire ring. Perfect. Okay, where are we now? So that's good. Now let's say, let's just keep adding on to this. So we're going to duplicate this other planet node. We're going to again duplicate the alpha over. And from here, you might start seeing a trend. It's essentially using the alpha over node to plug in all the various little images. So I'm going to go find the second set of rocks and plug it in to the alpha over, duplicate that, disable the data blocks, and let's get in here to load the second one, the little planets that I'm adding on. And you can see with each one we just add, it just gets added on top. Duplicate the alpha over again, duplicate the image again, unload the data block, open it up where we saved it. I believe it's this one here. Yep, and we plug it in. And now we have essentially all the inputs plugged in. We could stop here, but what a lot of people tend to add is a lens distortion effect to the image. So you'll want to plug that in between the alpha over and the little control node here. And you can play with this. I generally don't edit these very much because you can see even small values change the projection of the image quite significantly. So I'm just going to go and change some values to something that I've played with before here. And frankly, these are the ones I use on my actual image. So if you have a lower distortion, lower dispersion, you can change the size of the image and it doesn't really get everything cut off. But if you do see these little edges here that you want to avoid, you just hit fit and it will scale the image accordingly. And you can continue going on and editing here. If you want to edit the color, you can use the color and do a color correction and put those nodes in between the alpha over and the lens distortion. And then you can now edit all the values on your overall photo. And if you don't want it, just remove it. And from here, when you go and search for the little nodes that you want, you can see that essentially everything that you're going to see or that you might want in a GIMP or a Photoshop type app is essentially here. And you just add in the different nodes to the various locations. If you only want to edit one of the images, you want to add in your node in between that and where it's hooked up to. So when you're rendering your image, you want to make sure your X and Y resolution or your percentage makes your image the same scale. Because as you can see, if I set this to 100% and try and render at 1080p, and I hit F12 to render, you'll see that it's zoomed in on a 1080p section of my image. Not really what I'm looking for, so I have to ensure that this is either at 200% to meet with the 4K background images that I started with. You can see here. Or I just have to set it manually to the 4K resolution. And that's really enough. That should be able to get you started with the compositor and be able to take something that you may have rendered and do your editing like you would have in Photoshop, but in Blender. So I hope that's something that helps you guys out, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks. Bye.